The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by the UMass 5 College Credit Union, dedicated to creating access to financial well-being for local people, businesses, and communities. Insured by NCUA, umass5.coop. The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Haas Pottery in 50 Arrow Gallery at Eastworks. Japanese-inspired ceramics and textiles, where every piece is handmade in the Pioneer Valley for home, ritual, or someone dear. HashiPottery.com.
Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. Later in the show, we'll hear more about a new theatrical work that's being workshopped in Ashfield, and we'll tell you how you can see it this weekend when we speak with the team behind Seeing Violet.
And Professor Ousmane Power Greene shows us where and how you can find out more about folks and communities in Afro-Latin history.
But first, we're off to Scotland.
Wait a minute, isn't today the day we usually talk with Congressman McGovern about the Capitol Hills going on?
Yes, but to do so today, we got to cross an ocean and don a sporran.
Look, just because Trump cancels with the Democrats doesn't mean I need to cancel with the Democrats.
I know. I mean you.
Well, you made it. Your office forgot to tell me that you were in Scotland, but it's time once again for our rapid-fire round of our conversation with Jim McGovern, McGoverning with McGovern. First off, what are you doing in Scotland?
Well, I've actually I was in Normandy, and I was in London, and I'm in Scotland. We're on a bipartisan visit to kind of, to look at what the situation is here, look at our NATO defenses. And in Normandy, I had the opportunity to go to the beaches of Normandy, to be at the cemetery and pay honor to the many Americans who lost their lives in World War II, and get to lay a wreath while I was there. But and I got to go visit the graves of two brothers who were from Worcester. There's a family. A family had four sons. Three of them died in World War II. Two of them are buried next to each other at Normandy, the McEwen brothers. And so that was a special privilege. And it reminds you about, the bravery of these young people who risked everything to protect our freedom. And I hope we don't take it for granted.
Well, we can talk a little bit about freedom, too. That sounds like a real-life Saving Private Ryan story, very powerful. But we'll start with a little bit of negativity. There was a lot of criticism from people that are generally supporters of Congressman Jim McGovern on social media this week about you formally recognizing Charlie Kirk on the floor of the House in a legislative act. It's not a law. It's, a little bit complicated, a roll call bill number.
A non-binding resolution that was the thrust of it was to condemn his murder and to condemn killing of all the murders of anybody, for political reasons. And there were whereas clauses that I didn't like, but a few weeks earlier, every Republican joined us in a resolution condemning the murder of the Speaker of the House in Minnesota. And it's not what I would have written. And again, it is a non-binding resolution. The Senate passed this by unanimous consent. Republicans in the House insisted on a vote. And I just thought that, 60% of it I agree with, 40% of it I don't. And, and I also think we need to do something about promoting collegiality here and trying to lower the temperature. And it was non-binding, and it didn't, it has no force of law. But but I think it was a political trap that, unfortunately, some people I think took to bait. And so rather than talking about the fact that same day we voted against a continuing resolution that will throw people off of health care and raise their health care costs, this is what the conversation was about. So if people want to have it, they can have it. But I thought, on balance, I thought that what I did was the appropriate thing.
Worth noting that the entire Massachusetts delegation, including the senators, save Ayanna Pressley, also voted on that resolution. The fallout from the Charlie Kirk murder fell onto Jimmy Kimmel and his show on ABC last week. On this show, you asked whether or not ABC would, and I quote the congressman, grow a pair and stand up to the FCC chairman who was threatening to use the power of the federal government to shut down that show. What's your take now that Kimmel is back, and also on the fact that both Sinclair and Nexstar, who our television-owning companies have decided to continue to keep Jimmy Kimmel off the air.
Yeah, well, I'm sad and upset about the latter part of that. I'm glad ABC put him back on the air, but the bottom line is that this is a freedom of speech issue, and I'm in politics, and people make fun of politicians, comedians make fun of politicians, but if we're going to live in a country where comedians are not allowed to be funny when it comes to politicians, that's probably not a country we want to live in. This is banning comedians is what they do in Russia and China and in Hungary and in other authoritarian countries or dictatorships. And we've been talking about this issue for a long time about how we're creeping toward authoritarianism, and people need to wake up and they need to understand that our very democracy is under threat, including our freedom of speech, our ability to be able to say what's on our mind. I know people's free speech ought to be protected, whether you agree with them or not. We can argue about it, we can dissent, but at the end of the day, freedom of speech is something sacred here, and we shouldn't be so willing to allow this president to trample all over it.
It seems like there was enough public pressure on Disney and the threat of canceling Disney and Hulu and all that it did move the needle, but I guess maybe that's yet to be seen.
Well, but here's the deal. Public pressure still matters. The outcry after Jimmy Kimmel was taken off the air was significant, and I don't think ABC did an about face just because they care about freedom of speech. I think they also understood that this backlash was real, and that people, by the way, not just people who think like me, but including some very conservative people, were upset by what had happened. But look, you saw Trump's tweet in the aftermath. I mean, he's not happy, and he's going to continue to use his office to intimidate networks and other institutions that don't agree with him, and try to get them to change their ways. And whether it's a media company or whether it's a college or university or whether it's another major institution, people need to stand their ground and to do the right thing.
Speaking with U.S. Congressman Jim McGovern, who's in Scotland, the lightning round McGoverning with McGovern, the shutdown, is it going to happen? Are the Democrats going to hold the line? Should they be asking for the concessions about Medicare and throwing people off health care, as you've mentioned, or should they just, out of course, say, we're not doing this, we're not voting with the Republicans?
Sorry, hold 1 second, Marty.
You got
hold
it.
On.
The Scot, I can wait for the Scots.
I'm sorry, I'm in the. No, I mean, I look, I don't want a government shutdown, and what we're fighting over is trying to protect people's health care and protect people's, protect the ability of people to be able to afford their health care. And I think, that's what's at stake. If we don't do something about the enhanced tax credits or about the Medicaid cuts, people are going to lose health care and people are going to see their bills skyrocket. I think health care is something worth fighting over.
That seems like where it's going to stay. We did have Congressman Richie Neal in the studios yesterday, and he said essentially the same thing. A quick question from listener Fred Rose, who wants to know about the Hobbs Act government extortion and whether what Trump is doing amounts to a violation of the Hobbs Act, and whether or not people who have been impacted by the quote-unquote extortion could band together to share the legal fees of resisting this government extortion via the Hobbs Act, and would you lead that charge?
Look, this falls under the same category of what we were talking about before, about kind of respecting norms and freedoms and having the government come in and basically kind of censor and provide information only they see fit to get to our constituents. Yeah, we're trying. We're fighting on all different fronts, right? And but again, it requires more focus, I think, by everybody in this country. And so. But I'm happy to follow up and to figure out how we can be effective on that.
We're going to skip the Epstein files thing because it looks like you're going to have the signature you need in October with Arizona. Quick thoughts on Trump at the UN and the change in tune on Russia versus Ukraine, saying Ukraine could win back all the territory that Russia has taken.
Yeah, well, we'll see what that means in terms of actions. Words are one thing. Words have been all over the map on that issue, but we have to wait and see what happens. But look, I still believe in the UN. I still think it's a valuable institution, and I want to make sure that we continue to fund it and that we work together cooperatively and respectfully with countries around the world, and that we find ways to better elevate human rights.
Nick Modern from Demilitarized Western Mass wants to know if you're running for Congress again in 2026.
Yes.
Great. And last question, not what's giving you hope this week.
You didn't tell me whether he's happy or sad about me making that announcement. No, look at what gives me hope. You know, as I mentioned, we visited Normandy, and again, just listening to the histories of all those, you know, who are enshrined there, you know, reminds you that you know, that there were people who were willing to sacrifice everything to protect our freedoms, and you know, they didn't take it for granted, and we can't either. And so, you know, I just was in such awe of the individual stories. I mean, I walked around and read the story of you know, like about 100 people that I, you know, had the time to go through their biographies, and you know, people who left and volunteered to protect our country when they weren't even old enough to vote, or who left babies behind, and you know, new wives. And I mean, it really is an inspirational part of our history, and I think we all need to be reminded that people can make a difference, and those who stepped up and protected our country, I think protected not just our country but the entire free world, and we owe them a debt of gratitude. We can't blow it.
U.S. Congressman from Scotland, even though he was supposed to be off schedule, taking time out of his day to talk with you. Thanks so much, Congressman McGovern. We'll talk to you again next week.
All the best. Thanks.
I feel bad bugging him when he's overseas and his office forgets to tell me that he was hoping to cancel, but he didn't cancel. And if you have a question for the congressman for next week, I'll try to ask it less quickly. thefab413@nepm.org.
What does less quickly mean?
I just had to rush through everything because he was like, I can do this, but I can only do it for a very short amount of time. I was like, okay, I'm going to synthesize this 4-paragraph long question into 2 sentences as best as I can in short notice.
Well, we're appreciative regardless.
Yeah, what a champ that guy is, taking the time out for, not just because it's the show, but for the constituents, for the listeners, for the people of Western Massachusetts that he represents.
Indeed. Yeah. Later in the show, a couple wrestles with the harsh realities of a legacy tied to slavery with the new production Seeing Violet, which opens in Ashfield tomorrow night.
But first, if you're like us and had questions about Afro-Latin history, up next, we'll get some starting places and suggestions from Professor Ousmane Power Greene from Clark University with The Power of History.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Eastworks, a community of makers, artists, restaurants, and services located in the Mill District of East Hampton, where community happens. Learn more at eastworks.com.
It's time once again for another edition of The Power of History with Professor of History at Clark University, where Enzo Belmonte is right now, Professor Ousmane Power Greene. And we are in the midst of Hispanic Heritage Month, as they call it, and we're going to focus The Power of History today, at Khalees's request, on some of the Afro-Latino folks that you want to focus on.
Why not look at the center of this Venn diagram?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, and this is a conversation, you know, that is really picked up, you know, during Black Lives Matter movement 2010s, and, you know, communities throughout the Caribbean and Latin America. Definitely a return to conversations around Afro-Latino, Afro-Latinx, and, you know, places like Mexico, for example, return to the census of African, right, as a designation. And by doing that, we get this acknowledgement that, you know, despite one's heritage, you know, sort of as a Mexican, in Mexico, there is this descendants of enslaved people, you know, comprised around, 1-2%, almost 2 million people who are of African heritage. And so, I think that this is a topic that people don't necessarily know as much about. So it's great to be able to spend time today talking to you all about it.
You have a mentor that kind of introduced you to a reader on this subject, right?
Yeah. So, I was fortunate enough in 2010 to have a fellowship at the Schomburg Center in Harlem. For those that don't know, it's a center of of African American culture and life, and it has an incredible collection and incredible mentor, a Afro-Latino Arturo Schomburg, right, Puerto Rican, Afro-Puerto Rican. But I had a chance to spend time with Miriam Jimenez Roman, who her and Juan Flores put together an Afro-Latino reader. And she was, at that time, working on that, 2009, and it had just come out, and she was doing work because, as she describes it, growing up, coming to New York, growing up in the city, being a sort of Afro-Latino herself, recognizing, teaching courses in Caribbean history and Latin American studies, they're not just being somewhere that people can go to, and just have all that evidence brought together. I've been interested in this conversation since I spent time with her.
Which is cool, especially because, I think in a lot of the diaspora, what passes for, Afro-diasporic culture is mostly, Black American.
Yes. And
there's a lot of pushback to that. There's a lot of interesting nuance to that, but, it's always important to see, exactly how far the diaspora spreads.
Yeah. I mean, for those that, I teach intro guys. So when we use terms like diaspora, we want to make sure we clarify. So the dispersal of African people, by and large, through the slave trade, throughout the Caribbean, Latin America, and Mexico, which, I'm not sure how many people have been exposed to the history of Mexico, but the second president, Vincent Guerrero, was of African descent. And, finds his descendants, his mother is of African descent, and who was a part of abolishing the slavery in Mexico, 1820s. He comes in at 1829. And so this sort of early history of this intersection between African descended people who were once enslaved in places like Mexico, and the ways in which that's a central part of Mexican history, right? Caribbean history, Afro-Latino history, certainly is really important.
Who are some of the other folks that you want to highlight? Professor Ousmane Power Greene?
I was thinking a lot about, my own work, and thinking about, my interest, everyone who's listening, is in looking at the African Americans who left the United States. And so I've been writing on that for Black Americans who went to Liberia. I worked on some projects looking at African Americans that went to Canada and shaped Canadian history. Shout out to Slavery North Project that's really at UMass Amherst, that's really looking at Canadian history and the fact that many people in Canada aren't aware of this sort of African descended people, and also in Latin America, specifically Dominican Republic. And so I've been particularly interested, going back to the theme of Mexico, of thinking about, what they call the Mascagos. Get the pronunciation right, y'all go call in. These Black Seminole descendants who were forced to Oklahoma in the late 1840s, everybody, right? And so they're going to cross the Rio Grande, they call it the River of Freedom, south. We talk about the Underground Railroad north, but we don't talk about the Underground Railroad south. Right? And so in the 1840s into the 1850s, this group, that originally originated out in Florida, is going to find their way to Mexico and establish a community in Mexico, who actually celebrates Juneteenth. Which is brilliant, right, to think about the impact of Juneteenth in the United States, right, in Texas, but also in Mexico, in this small community.
Cool.
And the name of that group again?
The Mascagos is the name, which people think is, from Muskegee, which is another sort of term that was used to describe sort of Black Seminoles that are coming from the old, what they call the Old Southwest. So in Mexico, they think that's where that term comes from, and the community is located in basically this area they call it Nacimiento de los Negros.
The birthplace of the Black.
Is the spot. 1850, baby.
Yes.
Right, 1850. And they were actually a buffer zone, right? So part of the reason they were drawn there was the Mexican government said, you guys can provide defense, right, against United States and in that buffer zone area. And so that's why, one of the reasons they sort of end up there, because they were warriors and soldiers and such. So that heritage goes back to 1850s. Again, many Mexicans, aren't necessarily aware of it. A lot of Mexican descended people in the United States, those that claim Afro-Latino descent, oftentimes don't necessarily know about some of these pockets and this history that goes back of African descended people that have shaped the histories of their countries. And so to me, it's immensely fascinating, because it just shows you the ways in which, sort of in cultural ways, but also political ways, right, in terms of ideas, is also a major impact of that era. So
We're speaking with Professor Ousmane Power Greene, our regular segment, The Power of History, and we're focusing today on Hispanic Heritage Month and some of the Afro-Latino heritage that many people have not heard about.
And I'd also be remiss not to mention my colleague Trent Masiki's Afro-Latino memoir book that came out a couple years ago, and where in that work, what he looked at more was like the 60s, sort of emerging Afro-Latino consciousness, right? And obviously the 60s civil rights movement, soon Black Power, is going to very much shape, organizations like the Young Lords, the Panthers are going to influence Brown Berets. And so in the 60s, you have those who are coming from countries in Latin America arriving in New York also, looking at the Black Power movement and asking those same questions, right? Why are we told we can't speak Spanish? Right, you see uprisings happening among students in LA, for example, East LA, saying, being influenced by this thinking around identity, right? Well, we should be proud of our Afro-Latino or just our Latino heritage, and this is something that I think people might be more about. And so what Trent's work does is he looks at Piri Thomas, Down These Mean Streets, Carlos Moore, and others who write these memoirs that really reflect on what it means to be of Afro-Latino descent. Fascinating work, everybody. Take a look at it.
Another interesting thing, I think, is the idea of, we talk a lot about racism in this country and its history, but colorism and racism exists in the Afro-Latino world as well. Absolutely. When you're looking at the Caribbean in different places, people who come from a certain part of a certain island may be darker in complexion and may be looked down upon by other folks even on the same island.
Yeah, and this really goes back to the long arc of, of racism that unfortunately is a major part of colonialism, right, in the Caribbean. Be it, we were thinking about Mexico specifically, you could think of, going way back, looking at those who are from Spain as being the top of the social hierarchy and enslaved people being at the bottom, right, very specifically, right? So negros, being at the bottom, considered enslaved, even if you were free, you were still considered on the bottom of that hierarchy, mestizos being in between. So there's more layers to it. But, what the legacy has been, and this is where, again, the consciousness raising more recently with the younger people is on trying to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Acknowledge colorism, acknowledge the fact that, families are very diverse. And some writers, and others have spent time on that as well.
Because colorism is a problem everywhere.
Absolutely.
And I find it hilarious, especially because, I look at my family, and literally we're all shades. Even my siblings, I am by far the lightest of my siblings. Yep. And my mom and my dad's family, same way, just a giant pile of shades. Yeah. So we can't really be mad at somebody for being lighter or darker because, we all here, we're all represented.
Absolutely. And it's something that those who are outside certain communities might not be aware of or are listening in. The ways in which, this is something, my class, I told people last time I was on, I was teaching my Freedom Dreams class, and that class looks at Black cultural history in the United States. And right now we're looking at the 20s. And the 20s in the United States, colorism, questions around passing, very famous novel that became a film, Zora Neale Hurston's work in Florida, looking at the diversity of Florida and looking at the different ways in which colorism functions in the Black community. It was really important to the work. I guess the reason I bring it up is that this movement of people through the Caribbean who are of Afro-Caribbean is something people aren't really aware of, right? They're not really aware of the ways in which, say, for example, Jamaicans end up in Costa Rica or in Nicaragua, right? And the diversity in Trinidad, right? Where you have these Caribbean, these places in the Caribbean, Latin America that have strong and old, African descended people who have been consistently challenging all sorts of hierarchy and embedded, colorism, right? Which, again, it's hard to weed out in places like Cuba or Brazil, where there was sort of a conscious effort to not talk about it and not put categories of Afro there, saying, oh, we're colorblind. We don't see color. But then you look at the statistical populations, right, and you look at those of African descent going to college less when people do the independent research, right? Yeah. So these are major concerns, but also points of celebration because we see this very organic unity through African culture, Mexican culture, indigenous culture that shows up in these communities, right? It's much messier, but it's also beautiful.
Professor Ousmane Power Greene, before we let you go, we're a month into the semester.
Yes.
What are the classes you're teaching at Clark University? They're always fascinating to hear about.
Yes. So, shout out to my students, my Black Power to Black Lives Matter class. As I was talking about 2015 and Michael Brown, and they reminded me that they were in 4th grade. So their memory of that experience was not that deep.
Wow.
Hey, some of us, every year we realize that, for them, for my students, they really want to know this more recent political movement. And, because I'm looking at the 60s and we're sort of comparing, student activism. I got the slides up of student activism on Clark's campus and, and sort of looking at the takeover buildings in the 60s. And there was a tremendous interest among alums who came back in the 2010s, Black Lives Matter movement and made those comparisons. So my students in that class, it's going great. We just looked at campus takeovers. So and now we're looking at sports. We read an article, looking at the Olympics and looking at Colin Kaepernick, which again, they were young, so they missed some of that stuff. Yeah, and Thursday we're looking at Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Lou said they're boycotting the Olympics, y'all.
Word.
So that's so that's going on. And then Freedom Dreams I mentioned before, Black cultural history, Harlem Renaissance. Y'all know all about it. But yeah, it's a lot of fun, and that class is great too.
Love it.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing us things to read more to
Hey.
learn more about
Professor,
Afro-Latin
we're due.
history. No, we get it. And also reading is good. Reading is
Yeah.
fundamental.
Well, I will say real quick before I hop off that as I was sort of preparing and thinking about this influential Afro-Latino reader that came out, I think it was 09, 010 or so, they actually have a volume 2 that recently asked for a call for articles and chapters. So you really see this field, that's developing and extending from back in the day to present, looking at, broad and diverse topics related to Afro-Latinos' life. So, yeah, looking forward to seeing that. I'll add that to the reading list once that comes out. Probably a few years. It takes a few years for a book comes out. So.
But if people want to take a look at the first book, what should they look up? Is it just called The Afro-Latino Reader?
Afro-Latino Leader, Juan Flores, and Miriam, who I know really, who, like I said, passed away actually in 2020, but I had a chance to spend time at the Schomburg with her, Jimenez Roman. So Afro-Latino Reader, you Google that, it'll come right up, and a collection of work. So
Professor Ousmane Power Greene, our regular segment, The Power of History, Clark University professor, but Northampton resident, tying in the 413.
Yes.
Thanks as always.
All right, thanks for having me on.
Tying the 413 to the 508
Yes.
with an iron grip.
Exactly.
Professor Ousmane Power Greene is also tied into our next segment, and we'll hear all about that a little bit. A new play in the Hill Towns, looking at the harsh truths of America and the ways they collide in modern day with the brand new play, Seeing Violet.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar in Hatfield, specializing in solar installations, battery storage, and clean energy solutions tailored to the homes and businesses of Western Massachusetts. Northeast-solar.com.
Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. This Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, Pauline and Devereaux Productions will present Seeing Violet, a new play about the modern repercussions of the legacy of slavery.
The play centers a couple in New England who discover connections to slavery while renovating their house. That revelation creates tensions and change in their interactions with a local grad student.
And with us to talk about this work are playwright Peter Snoad and production team members Jeannine Haas and Jean Koester. Jeannine Haas of Pauline Productions and Jean Koester of Devereaux Productions. Jeannine, you got a shout out from the former mayor of Northampton on the show yesterday because she says she's a longtime friend. She will be celebrated this evening at the log cabin.
Right.
But tell us about Pauline Productions.
Oh, gosh. Well, we were founded in 2006. I think our first play was actually a fundraiser for New Century Theater. We did David Mamet's Boston Marriage, which was a big hit. And I used to act with New Century Theater, and after we did that fundraiser, I was like, man, because we, they were hanging off the balcony. We had sold out, and I was like, I think I'm just gonna strike out on my own and do this.
Very nice.
And then we made it up to Ashfield when I moved up there. I was actually looking for a church to do Doubt in, and I was looking down in Northampton.
Quite the place to do that particular production that surrounds the church. Yeah.
And surprise, surprise, I was meeting a lot of no's, no thank you, at the churches. And then my wife took my mother-in-law to church at the First Congregational Church in Ashfield. She had Alzheimer's, not my wife, but her mother. And she looked at the minister, who was a woman, and turned to Alice and said, "Is that the priest?" And Alice, for ease, said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, it's about time," because she was Catholic. And then I asked the priest, I asked Kate, who was the priest at the time, the minister at the time, and she said, "I would love you to do Doubt in this church." So that was how we got there, and we just stayed, and they've been so supportive. They took the pulpit off, they extended the stage a little. It's been wonderful.
We're constantly pushing their furniture around.
Yeah. So that was the origin story of Pauline Productions from Jeannine Haas. But Jean Koester, tell us about the York production company, Devereaux Productions.
Devereaux Productions is much newer. I left my corporate job about 2 years ago, and I was in the moment directing a play called Cemetery Club with Pauline.
Did you do it in a cemetery?
We made cemetery in the church.
Okay.
It was really fun, and I had done 2 shows previous, all of which involved actors, and particularly women actors of a certain age. And it's really hard to find juicy, good roles and good stories for people of a certain age, and particularly women, and particularly about their friendships. And so that sort of sparked, that's what my mission's going to be, to look for those plays and continue to produce those.
Yeah. And we have a similar mission in that our mission statement is strong roles for women on stage and behind the scenes.
Yeah.
I like it. And that is the heads of Pauline and Devereaux Productions, who are teaming up for this play that will be happening in Ashfield this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, Seeing Violet. Before we get to the playwright himself, who's joining us, I believe from Boston, where he is located, tell us about how you came to this play and how it ties into our previous guest who was just on. We didn't even realize this until you came into the studio.
Oh, we read so many plays trying to find the right thing, and then we came across there's a place called New Playwrights Exchange, and we went there and we came across this play from Peter and really liked it. And at the same time, I saw a message from Edward's Church that they were doing a seminar last February that Ousmane Power Greene was one of the speakers, and I said, "Hey, let's go," because we were sort of like, can we do this play? Are we the ones to do this play? So we went and listened to him speak, and he was very powerful. We had a wonderful conversation with him afterwards, and it kind of clinched for us, yeah, we need to do this play. And we went from there.
Yeah. And I actually, the one step before we went to find it at that location, I met Peter outside of the Amherst Cinema, where they were showing Janet Planet, where I was an extra along with everybody that lives in...
Everybody else that I know as an actor is in Janet Planet.
And the woman who played the acupuncturist in Janet Planet is a really good friend of Peter's, and that's where I met him. He was down from Boston, and they had gone to see that, and we started talking, and he said he was a playwright, and he said, well, what's your theater like? And, well, I've got a good one for you. And I kept that for a while, and I didn't really read it for a while, and then we looked at all kinds of shows, and I thought, okay, we need something for now. And I pulled it out, and we read it, and we loved it and thought it was so pertinent to right now. It's not polemic. It's a story. It's part ghost story. It's part mystery. And I think when people connect to a story, it's a lot mightier than a big polemic. So I'm sure Peter will talk more about what the play is about. But yeah,
Well, let's bring Peter into the conversation. That was Jeannine Haas, who is directing the play that was written by Peter Snoad and is being stage managed by... No, Jean is stage managing and Jeannine is directing, right?
Yes.
That's going to be hard to juggle all of them.
It's a little
Jean
confusing.
and Jeannine, walk into a bar. And yes, we are with the playwright as well, Peter Snoad. We gave a little elevator pitch about what this play, Seeing Violet, is, Peter, but tell us what your pitch about this play. Tell us how you explain what this play is all about.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me, first of all. And I'll just give you a quick plot summary and then tell you a little bit about where I sort of came to the play. The play's about a wealthy white New England couple, Betsy and John, who decide to convert the carriage barn at their 18th century manse into an apartment. And in the course of the project, the workers uncover a number of ancient artifacts, including a manumission paper, a freedom paper, for an enslaved woman named Violet. Well, Betsy becomes kind of obsessed with finding out who Violet was and what happened to her. And her research reveals that not only did John's ancestors enslave people in that house, but they were also actively involved in the slave trade. And then the play sort of is really a dialogue, often very spirited dialogue between Betsy and John as they struggle to come to terms with this information about John's ancestors and their involvement in slavery and the slave trade, and what it means to them and what to do about it, because they have quite differing opinions about what to do with this information. So that's the sort of the plot, and I personally I've had an passionate interest in the history of slavery and abolition myself for some years, and I do some work with a nonprofit in Boston. We produce some educational resources about those topics. And you can probably hear from my accent that I'm not originally from here.
For one second, I thought you might be from Boston.
I could be from Boston, I guess.
There are parallels between the Boston accent and the British accent. Where in the UK are you from originally?
I'm originally a Londoner. I was born and grew up in the UK, and I've been here most of my adult life. But it's funny, when I was growing up in the UK, and which was, for 160 years, the largest slave trading country in the world. Did I learn much about that in school? Nope. Which is, not unusual for a sort of ex-colonial empires. They don't like to talk about what they did. But I was struck when I moved to New England and started to learn about the history of slavery and abolition in this region, how little a lot of people knew about it. And you could say that's by design, because our educational system doesn't address it in the way it should. But just doing the research myself, there were before the Civil War, perhaps a decade before the Civil War, there were 14,000 enslaved Africans, African Americans, and indigenous people in the New England colony. And of course, there were slave ship entry ports all down the eastern seaboard. You can go Portsmouth, Salem, Boston, Newport, Bristol, on and on. And I wanted to write a play that would sort of challenge white people to look at this history and to contemplate what it means for them, and to ask themselves, some questions, the kind of questions that Betsy and John engaged in sort of debating themselves in the play, such as, were there enslaved people in my community? Who were they? What were their names? What is their history? And how is my family, my ancestors, and my family going back generations, how were they connected to slavery? And what responsibility do I have as a white person to help heal the pain and trauma that was inflicted by people who look like me on other Americans whose skin color happens to be different from mine. So I felt like, and as Jeannine mentioned in earlier, is that, to try to tell a story of one family that was wrestling with these issues, and a wealthy and privileged family, but their wealth and privilege was gained through the institution of slavery and the slave trade. So that's where I came at it, and I've been totally thrilled with the rehearsals I've been to of the play, and I know Jeannine and Jean have worked, and our wonderful actors have worked incredibly hard to bring this to the stage. I actually I've had one stage reading during COVID that was virtual, but this would be the first workshop production, which means really
a premiere.
A premiere of a workshop production. It's a distinction you can make about
it
this.
Still counts.
It still sounds good. Ashfield is going to be the first people on stage, to see this production.
Bringing
but
it to life.
Also, that it just, the timing of this couldn't be better from my point of view as a playwright, because by total accident, a theater in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, called the Players' Ring, decided to do a full production of the play, which is happening in January. So, and Portsmouth was, a big slave ship entry port. Mm-hmm. So there's a collaboration there with the Seacoast African American Culture Center and the Black Heritage Trail. So I'm what's been great about this collaboration with Jeannine and Jean is that it's sort of, we're honing the play so that when it actually does have its full production, it'll be the best that we can make it. So it's been really wonderful for that.
And I'll say we are far from a staged reading, and we just couldn't leave it alone. We have lights, we have sound, we have costumes.
On the cusp of being a full production.
It's a full production, even if you're workshopping through some of the ideas.
Exactly. Workshopping was just so, because there was going to be changes potentially right up till the last minute. Exactly. The actors can carry their scripts,
right?
But they're almost off book, and it's a full production really. But we're always working on it. So,
and that's a really interesting spot to see theater anyway, to see it in process as opposed to something that's finalized, like seeing that and perhaps seeing some of those changes as they get enacted on stage is really interesting.
It has been very exciting. It's been very fun to watch the changes.
And I have found that when people, after about 2 minutes, they don't care that the actors have their sheets in their hands or sides.
Yeah, if your actors are good, it doesn't matter.
They've already they know they're at a play. They're willingly suspending their disbelief from Jump Street.
And these are really great actors, so I'll just say we have Mo McElligott, Chip Roten, and Sabine Denise Jock as our actors, and they are phenomenal, but well known in the Pioneer Valley, and they're really putting their whole heart into it.
Well, let's take a quick little break here, and we will be back with the playwright behind Seeing Violet, who is joining us from Boston, Peter Snoad, as well as the director of the production, Jeannine Haas, and the stage manager, Jean Koester. You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM. Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. We're talking about the play Seeing Violet, which you can be seeing in Ashfield this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We're talking with the playwright, Peter Snoad, as well as two of the production team members, Jeannine Haas and Jean Koester.
So a play of this topic, I think, could have a much bigger cast and be really involved. And there's definitely costumes and set pieces and lighting and things happening with this one. But there's a certain sort of intimacy that comes with having your cast be so small. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about some of the impact of having such a small cast for a story like this?
Well, this is Jeannine. Two of the actors play two different roles. So there's Violet, who also plays Imali, and that's played by Sabine Denise Jacques. And Chip Roten plays two characters as well, Obadiah, as well as John. Yeah.
And it's been interesting because, so Peter could maybe speak more to this, but for us, that has been the historical coming through to the present through those people playing the same roles. So what we've talked a lot about for this is how does history come through to you, and how do you respond to that, which Peter alluded to with Betsy and John's argument. And it's interesting on stage because of who's playing it. So the same actors are playing the people from 1760 as the people current. And so that thread of history is coming through because they're the same people.
One of the things that seems to come through in the play is that they are trying to rent out this space that they know has been historically used as a slave quarter, and they're trying to rent it out to a woman of color, and then they, filled with white guilt, don't know what to do, and they figure that they should not rent it to her. There's a clip about a burst pipe that we can hear from one of the rehearsals of this play, Seeing Violet, which you can see this weekend in Ashfield.
So, it's good to meet you, finally. Unfortunately, we have some disappointing news about the apartment.
You rented it to someone else?
No, we would never. No, there's been an accident.
What kind of accident?
A burst pipe.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, the system is brand new. Well, not quite brand new, but, recent.
Where is it?
What?
The burst pipe.
In the bathroom?
Maybe I can fix it. I was a plumber once.
Oh, that's very kind of you, but we have this guy. He's on the way.
And the water damage.
It's a mess. Probably roots in the floor.
Yeah, and the apartment is basically unlivable by now. I am so sorry.
When did this happen?
Well, it's hard to say. We discovered it this morning.
And you didn't think to text or call me?
I'm sorry. Well, we were kind of freaked out, and I totally spaced it.
Well, that's too bad.
And it's terrible timing for you, obviously. I mean, do you have other options?
Not right now.
Well, if there's any way we can...
I'll manage.
That is a clip from the new play, Seeing Violet, which will be seen on stage for the first time, but maybe not in its fullest form yet, this weekend in Ashfield at First Congregational Church on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. There are matinees on Sunday as well. You can go to paulinelive.com for tickets.
It seems like the interesting thing about listening to the rehearsal is that Amalia's character seems almost like a MacGuffin. Like in a post-Get Out world, I'm not sure anyone else would have stayed long enough to continue any sort of conversation. But her presence in this play is incredibly important, not just as like the sole Black character, but also kind of as a point of reframing and centering for these other two characters.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, she is a MacGuffin. And but I'll tell you what, this actress has really filled this role out. It's not just an instigator. And she also plays Violet.
Right. And we talked a lot about that, like, why did she stay? So we talked about that in the context of her filling the role out, because she's strong. She's powerful. Yeah. She's like, excuse me?
And not much later does mention, like, it feels real not safe here. So I think maybe I'll go. Yeah.
And Peter, was that your intent as the playwright behind Seeing Violet? That this Violet, woman who plays Violet, and then it plays an analog in the future, is sort of a MacGuffin?
I'm not sure that I know what a MacGuffin is.
It's like a plot device that seems like it's very important, but ultimately isn't. It's like the briefcase in Pulp Fiction, if you've ever seen that movie.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. It's like the wine in our wine tasting segment. We're never really talking about wine. We're talking about everything else.
Yeah.
But in this case, we're.
But was that by design as a playwright, Peter?
Well, it's funny because, as Khalees said just a minute ago, it seems unlikely she would stay, right? And I remember in a very early draft of the play, I shared it with a Black friend of mine who said, "Peter, come on, she'd be out of there immediately," right? Yeah. So then I had to figure out, since it's important to the plot that she stays, there's an exchange between them about they ask her to stay, and then she's like, "No way," and then he asks, "What are you going to do? Where are you going to go?" And she makes an offer to cut the remark about, I'll sleep in my car on the beach. And they think and she said, I'm kidding. So then they say, they sort of have a bona fide. They say, you remember the woman at the college who told you about this, and she was the an official at the college where Imani is going to be going to school for a semester. Annie told you about this, and she's an old friend of ours. Do you want to call her? And so she does, and she sort of she convinces herself that she has to stay at least one night because she's nowhere to go.
Exactly,
and she has the bona fide. This woman is
the weekend
a pillar of the
everyone
community.
is moving in.
Well, it sounds like a fascinating play, and we have been speaking with the playwright himself from Boston right now, originally from the UK, but coming to Ashfield this weekend. The play is Seeing Violet, and the playwright is Peter Snoad, as well as the director and team members, producers from Pauline Productions and Devereaux Productions, respectively, Jeannine Haas and Jean Koester, who will be putting this play on this weekend at the First Congregational Church of Ashfield.
Thanks so much for telling us about this. This is really interesting.
Thank you for having us. It's been fun.
Thanks for having us.
And it was nice to get to eavesdrop on the rehearsal as well and have some of the clips that we didn't even get to on the show today to get a better taste
You
of
can
it.
play them anytime.
Okay,
Just
thank you.
phone in.
We certainly will.
Good to know.
On the next Fabulous 413, we'll speak with author Alex Storiński about his book, Spies in My Blood, Secrets of a Polish Family's Fight Against Nazis and Communists, as he prepares for a public event at Elms College this weekend.
And just over the mountain in East Hampton at Tip Top Wine Shop, we bring the most autumnally colored libation into our glasses for an Argentinian orange wine Thunderdome.
But it's really just a MacGuffin, the wine. And we'll celebrate a new album for beloved almost local band, The Mammals, and the release that they'll have at the Parlor Room for our Live Music Friday tomorrow. I'm Monty Belmonte.
I'm Khalees Smith. Go find out something uncomfortable about your history today.
Julie, oh Julie, you won't go. Leave this house and all you know. Julie, oh Julie, don't leave here.
Finding a job is hard enough, let alone when people are trying to scam you.
The longer they're out of work, the more they may be willing to ignore or just say, well, I really need this, so that red flag, I'm just going to see what happens.
I'm Kyle Rizdal. Job scams are doing pretty well right now. We'll tell you more next time on Marketplace.